all women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus 8. Logic of life. The reality principle, manly debate, living spirit of the West, and universal morality, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. Logic of life, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The phantom subject and the carpenter's proof. Why the bumbling dad propaganda, the race-class nexus, and the diversity hire can't build a shelf, and how the hammer, the shit test, and the truth will smash the woke parasite into oblivion. You stand amidst the ruins of a once great civilization, gentlemen, yet you are told by every screen, every state-sanctioned bureaucrat, and every pastel-haired harpy of the HR department that you are the oppressor. It is the grandest lie ever concocted, a conspiracy of silence so vast it blots out the sun. I see you there, holding the crumbling pillars of the West on your back, while the parasites gnaw at your ankles, and I am here to hand you the sledgehammer of truth. We are not living in a progressive era. We are suffering through a pathological rejection of the reality principle. A collective neurosis where the biological imperatives of the weak have been weaponized into a political ideology that seeks to castrate the strong. This is not an accident. It is the revolutionary subject of Lenin and the Frankfurt School realized, not as a workers' revolt which failed because workers had too much dignity, but as a revolt of the perpetually aggrieved, the oppressed identities who define themselves solely by their envy of your competence. If the premise of Marxism is that unequal outcomes are proof of theft, then the conclusion is not justice, but the systematic looting of the competent by the incompetent. Therefore, the modern social justice movement is merely a pseudo-intellectual ransom note demanding you apologize for your own strength. Consider the daily barrage of gamma bias that pollutes your mind like industrial runoff in a clear stream. Turn on the TV and what do you see? A bumbling, overweight father who cannot operate a toaster without the smug intervention of his equestrian wife, who rolls her eyes at his ineptitude. This is a deliberate psychological operation designed to sever the respect necessary for patriarchy, the very structure that built the roads, the aqueducts, and the code of laws you stand upon. They mock the bumbling dad because they fear the wise father. They must destroy your authority in the home to replace it with the authority of the state, substituting the paterfamilias with the nanny state. It is a fraudulent inflation of female value at the expense of male reality, a fiat currency of sexual dynamics that renders the masculine virtue of stoic competence null and void. Yet, look at the hard data of existence. Who keeps the lights on? Who mines the coal? Who patrols the dark corners of the night to keep the wolves at bay? It is not the gender studies major. It is you. The West is not a mosaic of oppression. It is the masterpiece of the apprenticeship mastery ladder. A hierarchy of competence that is now being dismantled by the diversity. Hire a physical manifestation of the lie that identity outweighs ability. We are entering the forge of logic to melt down this effeminate degeneracy and recast the sword of Western vitality. I will guide you through the syllogisms that shatter the race-class nexus, exposing it as the incoherent rambling of resentful children who cannot build, so they seek only to rule the ruins. We will dissect the evolutionary psychology of the indecisive woman, not as a flaw, but as a fitness test, a shit test of the highest order, designed to see if you have the spine to take charge and impose logos upon the chaos. This is the carpenter's proof. Can you build something simple? Can you use your hands? While the leftist debates the semantics of the hammer, the Western man drives the nail. It is time to reject the conspiracy of lies regarding female nature, to stare into the abyss of genocentrism without blinking, and to reclaim the transcendentals of the good, the true, and the beautiful from the grubby hands of cultural Marxists who wish to drag all of creation down into the mud of equality. We do not ask for permission. We do not apologize for our nature. We simply act, we build, and we conquer. The phantom subject and the parasite's creed, whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. The Roman poet Juvenal understood what every red-pilled man now witnesses in the wreckage of Western institutions, the deliberate installation of incompetence as virtue. Consider the Boeing 737 MAX disaster, 2 crashes, 346 dead, billions in losses, all traced to software written by engineers hired not for their mastery of aerodynamics, but for their contribution to workplace diversity. Internal documents revealed that Boeing had abandoned its rigorous apprenticeship mastery ladder in favor of accelerated promotion based on identity categories. The result? A once great American engineering firm now produces aircraft that fall from the sky. This is not coincidence. This is the physical manifestation of revolutionary subject theory, the elevation of pathos over logos, of grievance over competence, of the perpetual victim over the disciplined craftsman. The word revolution derives from the Latin revolutio, to roll back, to turn around. The leftist revolutionary does not progress, he regresses. He seeks not to build, but to return humanity to the pre-civilizational swamp, where the strong are shackled by the collective weakness of the tribe. Contrast this with restoration, from the Latin restaurare, to rebuild, to renew, to establish again upon firm foundations. The Western tradition has always understood that civilization requires the discrimination of values, the master craftsman over the apprentice, the virtuous over the vicious, the competent over the incapable. The revolutionary inverts this hierarchy, calling good evil and evil good, proclaiming that the very standards which built cathedrals and constitutions are oppressive. But oppression, properly understood, is merely the natural consequence of reality's indifference to your feelings. Gravity oppresses the weak, mathematics opposes the enumerate, and the apprenticeship mastery ladder oppresses those unwilling to climb it. Friedrich Nietzsche identified the psychological engine of this inversion as ressentiment, that toxic brew of envy and hatred which cannot bear the sight of excellence. The slave cannot become the master, so he must convince himself that mastery itself is wicked. Watch any diversity officer, any feminist advocate, any critical race theorist, and you will observe the same pathology, a seething resentment against the natural hierarchy of competence. They do not wish to equal the Western man's achievements. They wish to destroy the very standards by which achievement is measured. This is why the university, once the bastion of logos, now churns out grievance studies majors who can neither construct a logical syllogism nor refute one. The Marxist revolutionary subject is simply ressentiment weaponized, a creature defined not by what it creates, but by what it destroys. Consider the following syllogism. If oppression is defined as the existence of unequal outcomes, the foundational dogma of Marxism, feminism, and critical race theory, and if unequal outcomes are the inevitable result of differences in ability, effort, and choice, natural law, then liberation requires the elimination of ability, the punishment of effort, and the denial of choice. The revolutionary subject is thus revealed as the weaponization of incompetence against the competent. When a tech company fires its most productive engineers to hire diverse candidates who cannot code, it is not an accident, it is the logical conclusion of an ideology that declares competence itself to be a form of oppression. The parasite does not seek to become the host, it seeks to drain the host until both perish. This conspiracy of lies finds its perfect shield in the genocentric imperative. Biology programmed men to protect women, Civilization channeled this instinct into chivalry and due process. The leftist parasite exploits both. Watch how every wicked idea hides behind the skirts of vulnerable groups. Criticize feminism. You hate women. Question diversity mandates. You are a racist. Expose the biological reality of sex differences. You promote violence. The revolutionary subject is always presented as a victim, eternal, helpless, deserving of infinite protection. But this victimhood is a mask. Behind it lurks not weakness, but the will to power, the desperate clawing ambition of the inadequate to tear down the adequate and call it justice. The shift from classical Marxism to cultural Marxism represents the feminization of revolutionary theory. Where Marx focused on economic class, production, labor, material reality, the Frankfurt School and its feminist heirs shifted focus to identity, feelings, victimhood, subjective experience. This is not progress. It is the infection of the body politic with the pathology of the solipsistic feminine mind. The woman, biologically programmed to value safety and consensus over truth and competition, becomes the model citizen of the new order. Safe spaces replace the agora. Lived experience trumps empirical evidence. Hurt feelings constitute grounds for termination. The Western tradition of dialectic of thrashing out truth through adversarial debate is replaced by the kindergarten logic of the therapy session. All that matters is how you feel. Lenin understood what Marx refused to see. The proletariat would never revolt. Workers exposed to the actual conditions of factory labor, given the choice between the discipline of the capitalist and the chaos of the revolutionary, reliably chose the former. This is why Lenin invented the Vanguard Party, and why the Frankfurt School later invented the oppressed identity. The new revolutionary subject would not be the worker, but the racial minority, the woman, the sexual deviant. Anyone whose resentment against natural law could be weaponized against the West. These subjects are defined not by what they produce, but by what they resent: hierarchy, competence, beauty, truth. They are the eternal complainers, the professional victims, the diversity consultants who produce nothing but spreadsheets demonstrating their own indispensability. The leftist claims the mantle of altruism. He speaks of equity and inclusion and social justice. But scratch the surface, and you find not benevolence, but covetousness. The revolutionary subject does not want equality. He wants the master's whip without the master's discipline. He wants the CEO's salary without the 80-hour weeks, the professor's prestige without the decades of study, the civilization's benefits without the civilization's demands. The feminist who screams about the wage gap will not demand that women work the same dangerous jobs as men: logging, roofing, oil drilling, where 93% of workplace fatalities occur. The diversity advocate who demands representation will not acknowledge that representation requires qualification. This is not altruism. This is theft disguised as morality. And the Western man, trained in the virtues of charity and fair play, has been conned by his own best instincts into welcoming the parasite that will kill him. This spiritual cancer of ressentiment, the lifeblood of the revolutionary subject, cannot be contained within the sterile cubicles of the diversity hire. It demands the total subversion of the culture that spawned it. The parasite, having gained entry through the wounded flank of genocentric empathy, must now rewrite the reality of the host to justify its existence. If the man of competence is allowed to stand tall, the creature of resentment looks small, therefore the tall must be psychologically cut down. This is the logic of the leftist gambit. You do not raise the bottom through virtue, but by humiliating the top. We turn now from the bureaucratic infiltration of our institutions to the rhetorical bombardment of our screens, where the logos of the West is ritually sacrificed to the feelings of the mob. The castration of the public square, gamma bias, and the incompetent male. Advertising is the rattling of a stick inside a swill bucket. George Orwell observed, yet he underestimated the malice of the modern swill. Consider the tire commercial where a mother and daughter casually change a flat tire in the rain, empowered and competent, while the father and son cower in the back seat, weeping over a spilled latte, useless and terrified of the big scary machine. It is presented as comedy, a harmless giggle, but apply the flip the script test to reveal the rancid rot beneath the humor. Imagine the inverse, a mother paralyzed by a flat tire, screaming in hysteria, while the father and son efficiently solve the problem and share a knowing superior smirk. That ad would never see the light of day. Focus groups would reject it as sexist, executives would fire it for misogyny, and the media would burn the brand to the ground for perpetuating harmful stereotypes. The fact that the inverse is not only acceptable but ubiquitous is proof of a calculated agenda. This is not entertainment, it is a rhetorical pogrom against the masculine spirit, a deliberate demolition of the father figure to clear the path for the nanny state. Let us dissect this pathology with the cold steel of the trivium, specifically the syllogism that exposes this fraud. Major premise: authority is derived from demonstrated competence and the capacity to solve problems within reality. Minor premise: the media-industrial complex systematically portrays the male as an incompetent buffoon and the female as the hyper-competent savior in every domestic scenario. Conclusion: therefore, the media is engaged in a fraudulent transfer of authority from the male to the female, and by extension, the state, based on a fabrication rather than biological or economic reality. This is Graham bias in action, the psychological blindness that allows the observer to accept the diminishment of the male and the inflation of the female without cognitive dissonance. It is a lie told so often that it becomes the background radiation of the culture, convincing men they are surplus to requirements and women that they are the undisputed monarchs of the domestic sphere. Despite the objective reality of the apprenticeship mastery ladder, this bumbling dad archetype is not merely a trope, it is a psychological operation designed to sever the root of subsidiarity, the principle that matters should be handled by the smallest, most local competent authority, the family. By reducing the father to an overgrown child, the culture strips him of the moral mandate to lead. If the father is a fool, the mother must rule, and if the mother rules, she becomes the gateway for the state. The family unit is dissolved, not by divorce decree, but by the subtle undermining of paternal dignity. This is the castration of the public square. While the fiction on the screen depicts men as hapless accessories to female brilliance, the reality principle dictates a different truth. It is men who climb the transmission towers to restore power after a storm. Men who wade into the sewers to keep the effluent of civilization flowing away from pristine suburban kitchens, and men who work the dirty jobs that keep the lights on. The feminine leftist alliance enjoys the fruits of this dangerous, dirty labor, while simultaneously mocking the laborer as a brute or a buffoon. It is a parasitical relationship where the host is mocked by the parasite for having the very constitution that allows the parasite to exist. This manipulation exploits a tragic evolutionary mismatch. The male biological imperative is to protect and provide. When the culture signals that the male is a liability, a punchline, an object of disgust rather than respect, it triggers a primal shame response. For a woman, seeing a man mocked and useless triggers a biological disgust response. Hypergamy does not tolerate the weak. Thus, the media accelerates the breakdown of pair bonding, seeding the soil for the Lost Boys phenomenon. We see young males withdrawing from the mastery ladder, checking out of the demanding pursuit of excellence because they have been symbolically castrated before they could even pick up a tool. Why strive for virtus, the Roman concept of manly excellence and courage, if the overriding cultural message is that your very nature is a defect? They retreat into video games and pornography because the real world has been presented to them as a hostile place where their instincts are criminal and their competence is a myth. We must name this demon. It is the demon of ingratitude and inversion, and the only exorcism is the relentless, aggressive reclamation of the truth that Western civilization was built by the competent hands of men who refused to beclown themselves for the amusement of gynocentric spectators. But who are the miserable architects of this fraudulent dialectic, and what manner of biological refuse have they rallied to their banner? Having dismantled the logical scaffolding of their dogma, we must turn our gaze to the wretched coalition of the resentful, the bugmen, and blue-haired harpies who act as the mudsars of this new regime, lacking the virtus to build a cathedral or the strength to defend a border. These creatures seek only to rule over the ruins. replacing the mastery ladder of our forefathers with a hierarchy of victimhood where their own incompetence is enshrined as the supreme good, the alchemical fusion, the race-class nexus, and the dirtbag left. The ancient Romans had a phrase for it: divide et impera, divide and rule. Today's leftist ideologues have updated this strategy for the digital age, welding together two incompatible lies into a single weapon of civilizational destruction. They tell us race is a social construct, a figment of our collective imagination, yet simultaneously insist that class is an objective economic relation determined by one's relationship to the means of production. Permit me to demonstrate the logical absurdity through formal syllogism. Major premise: if race is merely a social construct with no biological reality, then racial categories possess no objective existence beyond subjective interpretation. Minor premise: class, according to Marxist orthodoxy, is determined by material economic relations which are objectively measurable. Conclusion: therefore, the race-class nexus is an incoherent fabrication, a logical impossibility that joins the imaginary with the material to create a phantom enemy. This phantom wears your face, brother. It wears the face of the Western man who built cathedrals, drafted constitutions, and mastered the arts of self-governance through the mixed constitution our forefathers bequeathed us. Consider the creatures who preside over this circus of resentment. I call them the mud tsars, bureaucrats of grievance, who could not lead a horse to water if you gave them a map and a bucket. These are the bugmen, the insulin-resistant soy guzzlers whose physiognomy announces their testosterone has fled to more hospitable climes. Beside them march the blue-haired harpies, screeching banshees whose sexual marketplace value collapsed sometime around their 20th partner, now seeking through political power what they could never attain through feminine virtue. Neither group has built so much as a birdhouse, yet both presume to lecture us on the reconstruction of society. They seek not to govern, but to rule, the distinction being that governance requires competence, while ruling requires only coercion. Watch them in their natural habitat, the University Diversity Office or the HR department, wielding petty tyranny over men whose boots they are not fit to lick. This ideology functions not as politics, but as religion, a secular Gnosticism promising salvation through the confession of a new original sin called privilege. The catechism is simple: confess your whiteness, denounce your masculinity, prostrate yourself before the altar of equity, and perhaps you may be permitted to exist as a reformed oppressor. The penance is perpetual, the absolution never arrives, and the priesthood of social justice grows fat on your self-abasement. St. Augustine confessed his sins to God. The modern male is expected to confess his existence to a 22-year-old gender studies graduate whose only marketable skill is manufacturing outrage. This is not redemption, but psychological warfare, a spiritual mugger's game designed to separate you from your birthright of confidence and competence. The alchemical fusion of critical race theory with classical Marxism produces what I term the supervictim, a composite identity immune to logic, reason, and the trivium itself. Where classical Marxism at least pretended to economic analysis, this new synthesis dispenses with material reality entirely. The supervictim needs no evidence, requires no argument, and acknowledges no rebuttal. Their victimhood is axiomatic, their oppression metaphysical, and your guilds predetermined. Attempt to engage them in dialectic and watch their eyes glaze with the fanatic's vacant certainty. Present statistics demonstrating that police shoot more white men annually than black men, that the racial wage gap disappears when controlling for age, experience, and hours worked, that women now outnumber men in university enrollment across nearly every discipline. Facts are hate speech to the true believer. Theirs is a faith position, and like all fundamentalists, they respond to heresy with inquisition. The foundational dogma sustaining this cathedral of lies is the blank slate, the childishly narcissistic fantasy that human beings emerge from the womb as identical clay, shaped only by oppression or privilege into their final forms. This theory, refuted by every twin study, every adoption study, every decade of behavioral genetics research, persists because it must persist. If biological differences exist between individuals, groups, or sexes, then the entire project of equal outcomes collapses into absurdity. Evolution does not pause at the neck, brother. The same selective pressures that shaped our digestive systems and skeletal structures shaped our nervous systems and cognitive architectures. The apprentice who spends 10,000 hours mastering his craft will surpass the dilettante who dabbles. This is not oppression, but natural law, as immutable as gravity and considerably less forgiving of denial. Intersectionality functions as the atomic weapon of civil society destruction, a theoretical framework designed to ensure that no alliance between men can survive scrutiny. Under this schema, a wealthy black woman outranks a poor white man in the oppression Olympics, while a gay Latino trumps both until a trans-identified disabled indigenous person enters the room. The hierarchy is infinite, the calculations complex, and the result guaranteed: universal suspicion replacing brotherhood, perpetual grievance supplanting mutual aid. The working class men who once organized into unions, fraternal orders, and civic associations now eye each other across racial lines manufactured by academics who have never held a tool or built a thing in their parasitic lives. Divide the serfs and the lords sleep soundly, except in our case. The lords are degenerate midwits, and the serfs are the builders of civilization. The left's most insidious theft has been the concept of justice itself. Justice, in the Western tradition, was blind. She weighed actions without regard to identity, applied the law without preference, and demanded evidence before condemnation. This is due process, the inheritance of English common law stretching back to Magna Carta, the recognition that power corrupts and accusation is not proof. Social justice inverts every principle. The accuser's identity determines credibility. The accused's identity determines guilt, and statistical disparities constitute prima facie evidence of systemic malfeasance. Equity demands not equal opportunity, but equal outcomes, which necessitates unequal treatment. There is no other way to produce identical results from dissimilar inputs. The DEI Commissariat now prowls every corporation, university, and government agency, enforcing this travesty through the threat of career destruction. One wrong word, one insufficiently enthusiastic affirmation, and the Inquisition descends. We have returned to the age of witch trials, except now the witches run the courts. This encounter was not merely a domestic inconvenience. It was a microscopic view of the civilizational collapse we face. The flood on the floor is the rising tide of cultural Marxism, drowning the dry land of the polis in a deluge of emotion and unreality. We have exchanged the logos, the rational ordering principle of the universe, for the chaotic babble of the nursery, prioritizing the lived experience of the hysterical over the objective laws of physics. To save the West, we must stop debating the water and start turning the valve. We must reclaim the carpenter's proof. The carpenter's proof: mastery, frame, and the reality principle. I once watched a theta male intellectual with a gender studies degree stand in a kitchen pointing at a bursting pipe, debating the sociological implications of water infrastructure failure while the room flooded, his girlfriend screaming in the background about the patriarchy's inability to control nature. I walked past him, grabbed a pipe wrench, twisted the valve, and the chaos ceased. The silence was deafening. This is the carpenter's proof. While the modern beta male retreats into the abstract, safe from the harsh judgments of the material world, the red-pilled man engages with application, action. The Greek distinction is vital. Theoria is looking at the stars. Application is building the ship to sail them. The leftist ideologue fears the hammer because the hammer does not care about his feelings, his pronouns, or his degree. The hammer only responds to the competent hand. The reality principle dictates that gravity is a law, not a social construct, and when you drop a brick on your foot, the pain is an undeniable truth that no amount of critical race theory can litigate away. This brings us to the etymological rape of the word virtue. It stems from the Latin ver, meaning man. Virtue is literally manliness. To take charge, to lead, is not toxic masculinity, a phrase invented by sterile harpies to pathologize male strength, but the very definition of prudence and fortitude. When a man leads a relationship or a project, he is enacting the mixed constitution of the household, the monarchic authority of the father, the aristocratic wisdom of the elders, and the democratic feedback of the family unit, the feminine imperative, unchecked by masculine frame, defaults to chaos because chaos is the womb of creation. It requires the sperm of order to fertilize it into civilization. When you abdicate the throne of your own life to appease the screeching harpies of equality, you aren't being nice. You are violating natural law and presaging the fall of your own empire. Consider the indecisive shit test, a weaponized behavioral trope modern women deploy with the precision of a sniper cunt. "I don't know, where do you want to eat?" she asks, feigning helplessness. The blue-pilled simp enters the loop of suggestion and rejection, weakening his position with every passing second. The evolutionary biologist sees this for what it is, a fitness test. Her hindbrain is asking, is this man competent enough to command the environment? Is he strong enough to bear the burden of decision? If you defer, you fail. The correct response is frame. We are going to Antonio's. Put on your shoes. This is not cruelty. It is the relief she secretly craves. It is the subsidiarity of the sexual marketplace. The highest authority, the man, handles the direction, freeing the lower authority to simply enjoy the ride. By refusing to lead, you force her to step into the masculine role, which breeds her contempt and eventually her departure. We must reinstate the hierarchy of apprentice, craftsman, and master, that ancient Western framework which the modern university system has dismantled to enforce financial servitude and indoctrination. The current educational regime operates to sever you from reality, training you to think about the world rather than shape it, because a man capable of shaping his environment poses a danger to the totalitarian state. The remedy lies in returning to the active spirit of the West, the apprenticeship. A man who can build a deck, fix an engine, or cultivate a garden holds concrete worth that no recession can purloin and no HR department can terminate. The rising suicide rate among men stems not from mental health stigma, but from the alienation of men from the fruits of their labor. We have swapped the satisfaction of the artisan for the chemical loop of the screen addict. Use the syllogism of competence to armor your mind against the gaslighting of the media matrix. Major premise. Objective value is demonstrated by the ability to manipulate matter and logic to achieve a desired end, building a table, formulating a valid argument. Minor premise, the mainstream media and leftist academia declare that the competent man is obsolete or toxic based on his immutable characteristics. Conclusion. Since the declaration contradicts the objective reality of the man's competence, the media is lying. Therefore, trust your hands over the TV screen. If the media says you are oppressive for being able to fix a sink, laugh in their faces. The divorce rate hovers near 50%, and family courts strip fathers of their children with a ruthlessness that would make Torquemada blush. Yet the culture tells you to trust women. This is a conspiracy of lies. The cuckoldry rates in some populations exceed 10%. That is biological warfare against your lineage. The only cure for this infection is to weaponize the workshop. You must withdraw your attention, the most valuable currency of the masculine soul, from the Babylon of woke and pour it into the tangible, build, lift, master. When the darkness of cultural Marxism finally consumes the last vestiges of the public sphere, you will be the man with the tools, the skills, and the frame to rebuild civilization from the rubble. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places, but those who have never been broken by the lie are the masters of the future. Reject the poison, pick up the hammer. I watch the modern world with the cold, unblinking eye of a surgeon observing a gangrenous limb, and I tell you this, the bumbling dad on your TV screen is not a comedy trope, but a psychological battlefield. While the Cathedral of Woke broadcasts its relentless propaganda portraying you, the builder of civilization, as a incompetent fool fit only to be guided by the wise hand of a scowling matriarch, reality weeps for the return of the king. This is the gamma bias of the public square, a deliberate syllogism of diminishment designed to sever your spine before you can even stand. They sell you the lie that your competence is toxicity and your leadership is oppression. But consider the logic. If the male is truly the incompetent parasite, then the entire apparatus of the oppressed identity, the diversity hire who replaces the apprentice, the revolutionary subject who cannot change a tire, logically necessitates the collapse of the infrastructure they parasitize. You are not the fool, you are the host, and the host is waking up. Do not mistake her feigned indecisiveness, standing helplessly before the menu or the unmapped road, for weakness. It is the oldest fitness test in the biological book. A subconscious probe to see if you possess the iron frame of a master or the jelly spine of a serf. The indecisive test is the feminine demand for the logos to pierce the fog of her solipsism. She is begging you to drive the car of state. If you fail to take the wheel, you validate the leftist dogma that authority is illegitimate. But if you apply the reality principle, if you seize the dialectic and lead, you shatter the glass ceiling of their narrative with the hammer of natural law. The remedy for the poison of the race-class nexus is not debate, but action, the sheer undeniable competence of the carpenter. When you build a shelf that holds weight, you refute the Marxist lie that all value is subjective. You prove that objective reality bows to the disciplined will. You have swallowed the red pill of Schopenhauer, navigating the web of lies to emerge here in the blinding sunlight of the transcendentals. You now see the race-class nexus for the glue-sniffing delusion it is, and you recognize the bumbling dad as the enemy's desperate panic. You are armed with the trivium, shielded by virtue, and fueled by the living spirit of the West. Go forth and build your fortress of competence. Let the mudsars wail in their safe spaces while you inherit the earth. You have stripped the mask from the genocentric demon and found the beauty of your own strength. Now go plant the flag of truth on the ruins of their Babylon. And now the sponsored book introduction, Logic of Life. The reality principle, manly debate, living spirit of the West, and universal morality. You look around the modern world and you feel the vertigo of a reality untethered from truth. A civilization that has lost its footing on the bedrock of being. It is not a feeling, it is a diagnosis. The West is sick, infected by a pathogen that does not merely seek to destroy borders or economies, but to dismantle the very architecture of authority that has guided the human species since the first man stood upright and struck flint against stone. I have spent decades analyzing the rot of Rome, watching as the glorious traditions of our ancestors, the stoic rationality, the martial valor, the relentless pursuit of logos are slowly eroded by a corrosive acid of sentimental nonsense and political subversion. I have walked through the wreckage of families and the ruins of men who were tricked by the mirage of equality. Believing that the laws of biology and the hard edges of reality could be sanded down by the whining of the offended. I know this path intimately because I have walked it myself. I have seen the biology of betrayal up close, witnessing how the genocentric social contract incentivizes the destruction of the very men who built the shelter in which the critics now comfortably nest. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, understood that women are fundamentally the unequal sex possessed of a specific nature that, when left unchecked by masculine reason, devolves into manipulation and deceit. I have experienced the wicked web of woke, a cultural Marxist trap designed to ensnare the rational mind in a labyrinth of guilt and self-abnegation, forcing strong men to apologize for their strength. The siege of sanity is real, and if you're reading this, you are likely one of the few holdouts, clutching your weapons of logic in a fortress that seems increasingly surrounded by the hordes of ideological barbarism. This book is the sword of logos, drawn to sever the hydra heads of leftist ideology once and for all. We will not simply complain about the darkness. We will ignite a fire so bright it incinerates the shadows. We will use the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric to dismantle the god of the gaps that the left worships, exposing their superstitions as nothing more than the primitive screeching of minds terrified by objective reality. We will apply the algorithm of alchemy, turning the leaden weight of modern oppression into the gold of intellectual freedom. You will learn to see the Tower of Babel not as a structure to be climbed, but as a chaotic prison of linguistic confusion to be shattered by the sheer force of articulate truth. We will refute the idea that all cultures are equal, or that gender is a construct, citing evolutionary biology and the historical record to prove that hierarchy is not a social invention, but a law of nature as immutable as gravity. However, a stern warning is necessary here. If you are a feminist, a social justice warrior, a Marxist, or a man who has been so thoroughly domesticated that you flinch at the sound of a strong voice, put this book down immediately. Do not read another word. This text is a hazardous substance to your delicate sensibilities and will cause you irreparable psychological distress. There is no safe space here, no trigger warnings, and no coddling of your fragile ego. If you're looking for validation of your victimhood narrative, go watch a mainstream news network or read a comic book written by a failed screenwriter. This book is for the lions, not the sheep. It is for men who are ready to enter the crucible of combat and fight for their dignity. For the man who remains, know that you have found the sanctuary of the mind. This is the renaissance of the Rex, the moment where the king within you reclaims his throne from the usurpers of mediocrity. You are about to embark on a relentless intellectual campaign to reclaim your rational sovereignty. We will reach the apex of the axiom, where truth is not a matter of opinion but a structural necessity of existence. The value of what you hold in your hands is measured not in sales figures, but in the restoration of your soul. Prepare to have your circuits rewired and your spine stiffened. The battle for the West begins in your own skull, and victory is the only option. Logic of life, the reality principle, manly debate, living spirit of the West, and universal morality. Written by Conrad Riker. By now, links in description.